how you like it, yeah.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the We All Know TV podcast. My name is Leaf. I am your host. This is a podcast where we watch the first episode of a show and then we talk about it. And today we are talking about X-Men 97. Now, before we get into the episode, I am 30, right? I grew up in the 90s. Well, the tail end of the 90s. I was born in 93. But I am a fan of the X-Men. Grew up on the cartoon, but it wasn't like a staple for me because my generation had X-Men Evolution, which was like, hey, what if a lot of the characters you knew were actually teenagers? That's for a different episode, but that one stuck out more in my head than the original animated series, except for like the theme song. So before I even got into this episode, I was like, I'm gonna just hop in. I'm not gonna go back and watch the old episodes. I'm not gonna watch a YouTube like recap. I want to see what this is like for someone who is kind of brand new to the series. And then also, like I said, I'm a comic book nerd, so I wanted to see how much like the episode would hit by itself for someone who just knows the characters and knows some of the history and stuff like that. So that being said, the premise on IMDb states, a band of mutants use their uncanny gifts to protect a world that hates and fears them. They're challenged like never before, forced to face a dangerous and unexpected new future. Sounds good to me. I can't say I would have done something better because I don't really know what this show is other than being a continuation of the original. If it is your first time here, I go through the plot beat by beat. That way you don't have to, and that way I don't miss anything. We start off with the classic theme song. And of course, Disney Plus was like, would you want to skip this? And I was like, fuck off, Disney Plus. Let it play. Get out of here. You know why I'm here. It's for the theme song. Still hits to this day. Will not skip it for any episode. We start off with a TV broadcast. Turns out that Charles Xavier, Professor X, has been assassinated. This has actually caused sympathy for the mutants. And this is juxtaposed to a kid in a car with a collar on, and he gets yanked out the car. And it's like, all right, cool. So if I haven't seen X-Men in forever, Charles is big dead, and the team is essentially doing their own thing. And people feel a little bit more sympathetical for the mutants, which helps their cause, especially the X-Men. So I was like, okay. We are in a warehouse. And off the bat, just full 90s vibe. This group of people, right? They got the beret on their head. It feels like G.I. Joe. They got the arm cannons on. It's looking like Mega Man. I'm like, we're back in the 90s, baby. So we are introduced to the kid. It is Robert DaCosta is his name. He wants to pay for his freedom. He's like, I'm rich. Just let me go. They're like, we don't want your money. We have put that collar on you so you can't even use your powers. And, you're stuck with us. And he's like, listen, I'm not like the other mutants. I'm one of the good ones. And they're like, yeah, okay, one of the good ones. And they're just full on mutant haters. They are not with the whole new sympathy, clearly. A storm starts to roll in. And Storm comes in like a fucking badass. And she's like, listen, give me the kid or else, things are going to have to get hot and heavy. And, of course, they're not about it. So things pop off. Bishop shows up to help. This might sound crazy. Bishop is one of my top 5 favorite Marvel characters. So when he popped up, I popped. Animation's looking great. I was a little bit worried about the animation just from the original trailer because this new, I don't know if it's 2D or 3D, but this new style that they're doing, like for the most part, it looked good in the trailer, but there were some spots where I was like, But so far, looking good, no complaints. I kind of liked this small note of like, hey, if a couple X-Men showed up, the rest are probably going to show up because they travel in packs. So it's kind of a cool nod of like people know at this point, like, hey, the X-Men are always rolling deep. So if you see one, there's probably some other ones around. Cyclops shows up, starts kicking ass. I mean, animation's flowing. He's laying it down. They have no chance. He's using his blast propulsion to like push him around the room and take out people at the same time, which is not only creative from the artistic team that's doing this, but it also shows a level of mastery from Cyclops. Like, I feel like once you start to really understand whatever superpowers you have is when you can start doing things differently, and then that will help you out in whatever fight you need to. So it was just sick all around. This whole moment made me giddy like a kid, and I don't like Cyclops. Not in the show, but like just in general. He's always come off as a Captain America, Superman, like Boy Scout type character to me. So I've never really cared for him, but like in this part, I was like, okay, with this version of him, I'm all on board. Granted, I haven't read like every single X-Men comic book, so I'm sure someone listening to this is like, oh, you need to. Probably haven't read it. Okay, so let me just say that. Anyways, so during this fight, one of the dudes reveals a Sentinel hand. He is out for the kill. He uses a blast, tries to take out Cyclops, almost hits him and Roberto. Also, they seem to be prepared because he like taps something on the console, and one of those, I don't know what you call it, but like the little two balls on a string like wrap around Cyclops. He gets tied up and he falls down. They're like, yo, take his visor, he can't see. They take his visor. He's like, oh no, please, no, psych. And then he like blasts them. And anyone who knows Cyclops knows when he doesn't have his little glasses on, usually that's like when things get out of hand. So he seems to have some sort of control on it. But when he was like, oh no, and he opens his eyes and it shows the explosion outside the warehouse, I was like, did he just Zack Snyder or Wonder Woman these two guys? Like, are they vaporized? Because we don't see them, we just cut. So I was like, damn, like, is he about that life? But we got no time with it. We're off to X-Mansion. And if you haven't seen any of the 90s cartoons for whatever reason, maybe you're young, maybe you skipped it. If you go back and watch, you know, the original X-Men episodes or even Spider-Man 90s animated show, they're moving at such a fast clip as opposed to what we get now that I forgot. So as I was watching this and like taking notes, I'm like, oh, we're just moving along. Like a lot of the things that I'm even extrapolating on that people are saying or doing, it all just happens like so fast that you can easily blink and miss it. So there's not really any time to like sit with anything. You just have to like, you have to kind of lock in and like observe and hear everything, or maybe like watch it twice and be like, oh. But anyways, we're already off to X-Mansion. Cyclops is talking to Gambit. Cyclops is like, hey, we really could have used your help. Gambit's like, yo, you guys ended up being fine. You know, everyone made it home safe. Like, what's the big deal? Gambit, of course, he's cooking with that outfit. You know, he got the crop top, glowing eyes. Man's looking good, all right? It's unfair. It turns out that the group from that warehouse are called the Friends of Humanity. They clearly hate mutants. Rogue shows up looking like a piece, and she backs up Gambit, and she's basically like, yo, we've been taking out plenty of Sentinels, we've taken out the group before, like, we'll be fine, like, we always handle stuff. This is where we get introduced to Morph, but he is transformed into Professor X, which I feel is untasteful, but I was like, all right, Morph. You know, they're all just kind of talking, and Gambit at one point takes the breakfast that he's making for everybody, and he like does his power, which makes things explode, and throws it at Cyclops for some reason. And this is where a pregnant Jean stops it with her telekinesis, throws it outside, and she's like, Gambit, what are you doing? Like, that could have been super bad. We're all the adults of this school. Like, there has to be some sort of, you know, maturity of you know, the older members. And Cyclops is like, what do you expect? It's Gambit, you know what I mean? Like, he's not one of those people. We move on to Roberto, who wakes up to classical music, and this is where Beast, in my opinion, is a weirdo, and he's just hanging upside down, and he's fixing something. He even like crawls over upside down and then flips around, and he's like, hey, I'm Beast. And Jubilee's over by the side, and she's like, that guy's weird, sorry about him. Turns out he's working on a time travel device, and yeah, we're just kind of, you know, this is where you are. Hey, nice to meet you. Roberto's like, let me out of here. I'll pay you money, okay, if that's what you want. At this point, some of the other X-Men have showed up. And they're like, no, we want to know, like, did you hear anything while you were captured? Like, anything that can help us, like, stop these people from hurting more mutants? And he's like, you know, like, what are you guys, like, are you holding me hostage? Like, what's going on here? And they're like, no, we want to make sure that everything's good before we send you out into the world, because clearly, as you know, these people are hunting down mutants. So if we send you back out there, they could just capture you again. So I get it from both sides. You know, Roberto, who's like, I just want to leave. And they're like, hey, we want to make sure if we're going to send you out, like, you're good. But he's like, you know, if I'm going to be trapped here, I don't want to be in this, you know, hospital room with this weirdo playing classical music and messing with tech. Is there something to do? And it cuts to Magneto in this, like, messed up room, and he like shows up and he's like ready to attack Roberto, and turns out they're actually in the danger room, which is like a VR training area. If you don't know, Jubilee's like, hey, we want to know what kind of powers you have, just so we can kind of like, you know, have it on file or whatever. And he's like, I don't want to do this. Wolverine shows up and pins him down. He's like, oh, ha, very funny. And Wolverine's like, yeah, terminate the program. Turns out it's the real Wolverine. And he pulls out his claws right in front of him. And it's like, what was the thought process here? Because he like pins him down with like his 2 claws around his head, where the third one, if it came out, would instantly kill Roberto. So I was like, Wolverine, I don't understand. Like, trust me, Wolverine's one of my favorites, all right? So he's in my top 10. So I'm like, all right, I like Wolverine, I like that he showed up, but I'm like, I don't know what you're doing here, my guy. Like, this isn't how you recruit people or, help them out. Not by, like, being someone that's like, oh, I might murder you. But anyways, we cut to Cyclops and Jean. They're talking to Dr. Cooper over the TV. Because he's like, yo, how did these people get their hands on a giant Sentinel arm? And she's like, well, the UN said, they got rid of all the Sentinels. Cyclops is like, okay, well, doesn't really explain my, my question of where this arm came from. And they're like, the person who made these things, Trask, is missing. So not really a good show of confidence from the government. What if they built another master mold, which is just a giant Sentinel that makes more Sentinels? Dr. Cooper doesn't really have the answers, and Scott's not really trying to hear it, so he just kind of hangs up on her. Jean's like, hey, you're a little on edge. Turns out that Charles, Professor X, death certificate has arrived. So she's like, oh, that's probably why you're acting all extra today. Scott and Jean kind of reminisce about being young and, just kind of like messing around. And Jean's like, listen, I'm pregnant. Stuff's crazy. It might be time for us to kind of like settle down and be parents and not be X-Men anymore. And he's kind of taken back by that, which I thought was weird because it's like, bro, what do you think you're going to be X-Men and be out there like fighting with your baby strapped on you? Like, come on, man. But before they can really dive into it, a basketball breaks through the window, hits a picture, and kind of disrupts their conversation. Jubilee lightly attacks Wolverine. Turns out that he scared Roberto, obviously, because again, he was like trying to kill him. So I was like, what are you doing? Scott shows up and he is like, okay, all of you on the basketball court need to go find Roberto. And Wolverine's like, who the hell put you in charge? And then Jean's like, Wolverine, can you please go look for Roberto? And he's like, all right, okay, I guess I'll go do it. And it's like, Wolverine, you simp, bro. Like, she's already pregnant with another man's baby. She don't want you, bro. Like, let it go. But before he heads off, Wolverine's like, the worst part about the professor being gone is that we're stuck with you to Cyclops, which is like way too harsh. Cyclops is talking to Jean and he's like, yo, we need to go see the man who killed Professor X so that we can find Trask and track down if there's any more Sentinels. So the X-Men go to the club/rave, or at least like most of the group does. They kind of separate. Rogue is talking to Gambit. She's like, I wish I could touch people. And he's like, listen, anyone who would let you touch them would be a real lucky guy. You know what I mean? So they hold hands, they're flirting or whatever. Morph tries to talk to Wolverine. He's like, yo, I know you feel some type of way. Maybe you want to talk about it? Wolverine's like, nah. So Morph transforms into Jean. And he's like, oh, if only, I wasn't with this other guy and pregnant with his baby and I was with you. And it's like, Morph, you're such an ass, dude. But Wolverine's like, listen, I know that the two of them are going to end up leaving the team. Like, have you not put the pieces together? Which kind of takes Morph off guard because somehow he hasn't put that together. And in the background, the Friends of Humanity show up, so things might pop off. Jubilee finds Roberto, and then she's like, let's get out of here. He's like, I will get out of here if you dance with me. So the two of them dance. Jubilee is confidently just showing off her powers. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. She doesn't really care if people know that she's a mutant. It turns out that the other X-Men have secretly, because we don't see it, not secretly, but like in the background, they have taken out the Friends of Humanity, and they're like, listen, they showed up to capture you again, so we gotta get out of here. We cut to Scott and Storm. They're talking to Gyrick. That is the guy who assassinated Professor X. And they're like, listen, you might have killed Professor X, but like people have more sympathy for mutants, so like you didn't really do anything. And he's like, listen, it's just a moment. They're gonna have a time where they, as in humans, realize like you guys are really the problem and they're gonna turn on you. Gyrick is like, yo, Scott, Cyclops, you're not really Professor X, you're not that guy, so I don't know why you're trying to pretend like you are that guy. And he's like, you know what, I am not Professor X, so we're gonna do things a little bit different. And this is where Jean goes and she starts to rummage through Gyric's mind to go see if they can find where Trask is. And it turns out that they built 2 master molds. So there's another one out there. But before she can really like delve into anything, she is pulled away into this like apocalyptic vision of like her son being born. But there's like graves everywhere. And then a master mold pops out the ground and then like incinerates everything. And she's like, we gotta go handle this now. So the X-Jet heads to the Sahara Desert. That is where Trask is. Wolverine is like, yo, we should like cut him up and like send him to the government. And everyone's like, yo, chill out. We're going to do this as a team and, in a good way. And they are randomly attacked by a Sentinel. It grabs Cyclops. He shoots right through it. But the X-Jet falls apart and everyone falls out the plane. This cool moment where everyone who can fly, so Storm, Rogue, Morph, who can transform into anyone, turns into someone who can fly, all catch the others who can't fly. Cyclops is still falling, but he's like, nice job, everybody, I'll see you on the ground. And then, like, just starts flying towards the ground, and I was like, bro, you don't have a parachute. Is he gonna do what I think he does? And he does, where he shoots his beam right at the ground to, like, kind of stop him so that he can fall down to the ground, which is super sick. And then from the trailer to me, my X-Men, and they all like fall around him and they do like the hero shot and then they move on. Dude, this whole scene just had me again like giddy like a child, and I was just like, kicking my feet and like laughing, smiling ear to ear. They go to meet Trask. He knew that they were coming, so it's Sentinels versus the X-Men. Essentially, this whole moment is just kind of like showcasing everyone's powers. And they're beating all of them up, but more Sentinels pop up, and Cyclops is like, yo, give them the forecast. And this is where all the Sentinels are like, Omega level threat detected. If you don't know, with mutants, they're like different levels, and Omega level is like the top, like, highest to like worry about. And of course, this is Storm. She starts walking in, lightning's hitting the sand, turning it to like glass. It is sick. She comes through and she just clears everybody because Storm's a badass. Cut back to the X-Men real quick. And they hit the old, team up, power up. Gambit hops on top of Wolverine, powers up his claws, hops off, takes his little pole, has it explode right behind him to like shoot Wolverine forward. Morph quickly turns into a blob so that Wolverine can like bounce on him and like shoot up. And then Wolverine goes right through the Master Mold, and that is it. Teamwork, baby. The government shows up. They are taking Trask away. Trask is like, it's only a matter of time before humans start to see you guys and all your powers and stuff, and really start to fear like what mutants can really do, and that you guys are actually the problem. I mean, he kind of has a point, but we haven't truly seen that yet, so it just keeps being hinted like, hey, there could be a real fear from humans, more than there already is, of like, you guys are really the problem. But for now, we ain't seeing it because they did X-Men. We cut back to Jubilee, who is with Roberto. She's like, taking out the rest of the Sentinels. You are safe now. She's like, listen, I know you feel some type of way. I was you, essentially. And I've gone through this whole thing. But like, now I'm happy and I have this family and they accept me exactly for who they are. And for who I am and who they are themselves, and us just being mutants. I don't think it's said, but it's basically implied that Roberto ran away. His family doesn't know that he has powers. He reveals to her that he has solar powers. It makes him strong, and of course, you imagine there's some sort of fire element to it. But he doesn't know if he wants to be an X-Men. He doesn't even know if he wants to really be himself. He gives her his number, and he's like, page me, which is so funny because it's like, if you're young and you're probably watching this, you're like, what, page me? What the hell does that mean? And he leaves. We finish off the episode with a basketball game about to start. They're about to pick teams. Cuts to Scott, and he's like, hey, everyone. And then Wolverine's like, you guys are leaving? Of course you're leaving. Like, it only makes sense. You're having a baby. But before they can really delve into it, again, they are interrupted by an intruder alert. Everyone goes to Charles' office. It turns out Magneto is chilling there. They're like, you gotta leave. And he's like, actually. And he sends over the last will and testament of Charles Xavier. And it turns out that he left everything to Magneto. So he is now in charge. And he's like, you guys are actually my X-Men. And the episode ends. And if you don't know X-Men, it's like his arch rival that has now gotten, the team. He's now in charge. Imagine if the biggest villain of whatever show you've been watching is now in charge of the heroes. It's like, what the fuck? So it's pretty interesting to end the episode. And then, of course, the credits are really cool. It is like almost like a encyclopedia, like video game style of like, oh, this is this character, and they have these powers, and they're like rotating, and it's a cool little, way to end the episode and kind of give even more context to people who, again, haven't seen the show in a while, or maybe don't really remember everyone's powers or whatever. To like have a fun way of being like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. So if it's your first time here, I have a 3-point rating scale. It is 1 and done, give it a chance, and I'm in. For this episode, I'm giving it an I'm in. I'm full on. All right, I'm in, baby. The animation, I'm loving it. The action scenes are sick, especially for Cyclops. Like, this show has made me like a Cyclops, I don't want to say fan, but like fan of this version for sure. Like, I'm down to see more of whatever this guy's doing in this episode. It doesn't make me want to go out and like read more comics about him, but I'm like, whatever this guy's doing, sign me up. And of course, recently I made like a top 10 list of all my top 10 favorite Marvel characters, and about like half of them are X-Men. So, which is kind of funny because I made that separate of this. So naturally I was like, oh, of course I'm going to keep watching more of this. Like, I inadvertently didn't know I love the X-Men more than I actually do. I think there's enough in this episode that I didn't feel like I was like, I don't understand what's going on. It just feels like I hopped into a season of a show without watching like the previous seasons, which is basically what it's doing, right? Which is what I did. I mean, I felt like it was pretty basic. Like, cool, Charles is dead. Scott's in charge. Oh, he's gonna have a baby, so maybe he's not in charge anymore. Oh, turns out the big rival is actually gonna be the guy in charge. How does that work when he's been the villain for forever? And of course you have Roberto, who's kind of like the new kid on the block, and he's like, I don't know if I want to be an X-Men, and I don't even know what that means, and like, what does it really mean to be a mutant and all that. And of course you have all the characters that you remember from the show, and a lot of times, even if you haven't seen the show, right, you've probably seen the Fox movies, so you have a good idea of like who everyone is, other than like Morph. I feel like maybe Gambit as well, definitely Morph for sure, but I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see him changing into other people and using their powers, so it's like, okay, cool, he can morph into other people, not that hard. So yeah, I think there was enough in this episode that I wasn't lost. And I don't feel like someone new would be fully lost. They wouldn't have like all the context, but I don't think it's like, I don't know what's going on at all. You know what I mean? So no spoilers, because I'm caught up to where we are now. But one thing I definitely noticed, and I mentioned this earlier about the episodes, is, again, and maybe this is just a 90s thing, but some things just happen so fast that you're like, oh, we're already, like, that's already a storyline that we're like leaving or possibly coming back to, or like, like things just move at such a clip that you don't really have time to like sit down and like really hone in on too many things. Like, we're already moving on to the next thing. So that is the biggest fear I have of this new series, I guess. I don't know if you really want to call it new, but yeah, that's my biggest concern, is like, there's already something that happened in one of the episodes. I was just like, oh, really? Like, fuck. I wanted to like see where that was gonna happen, or like how that was gonna, move into the future episodes of this season. But I mean, we'll see if things really get tied up in interesting ways, or if it's just kind of like, that happened, deal with it, we're on to the next thing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited. Again, I'm giving this one an I'm in, and that's where I'm gonna leave this episode. So next week, I haven't figured out what I want to watch yet. I might watch Shogun for you guys, but I'm not 100% sure. That's just an idea I'm throwing out there. But we'll see what it is next week. Until then, peace.